Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles podcast. If this is the first time you are tuning in, hello, my name is Becca. I am an amputee, a wheelchair user. I have a prosthetic, I use mobility aids, and I am proudly disabled. Today's episode, I am wanting to take a look at relationships in terms of healing and how that can be lonely sometimes. And I'm not just talking about romantic relationships, I mean, like, all relationships in your life. When I say relationships throughout this episode, that's what I mean, like friendships, acquaintances, romantic relationships, family relationships, all of that kind of thing is what I am going to be talking about today. And when you're on a healing journey, it can be pretty lonely sometimes. You grow apart from people who have been there for a long time. With myself, I feel like there's an effort to cling to people who were in my life before I had the accident, but were those relationships actually adding to my life, or were they actually keeping me from moving forward? Out with people who have been long term friends, I feel when I started healing, I would attract friendships and relationships in my life where the stability that I was trying to build around myself was really attractive, because chaos had been the norm in people's lives. And pardon me, even more of a burp there. It's one of those kind of things. Chaos attracts chaos, but stability also attracts chaos as well, because there are a lot of people who are at a point in their life where they know that they don't want to live a chaotic life anymore, but they just don't know how to achieve that stability. And when they see somebody with it, they think, okay, well, now how can I get that stability? I'm really at a place where I have been able to start acknowledging and identifying where my needs lie in relationships, and being able to actually use my voice and speak up when they're not met, instead of shaming myself and having that negative self-talk that I shouldn't have those needs and I shouldn't have to ask for them to be met, because that's not healthy for me. But when when it's consistently having to speak up and say, I feel like my needs aren't getting met in this area, and it's something where it's constant, it does just start to feel pretty tiring. I start to feel like I'm the problem, and then that triggers those negative self-talk that I was just kind of talking about, putting myself down. And I am really trying to practice to not do that. And it's really not easy to choose myself instead of somebody that I care about. I can only control myself and my actions, and if somebody else's actions are impacting me, I then need to put boundaries in place to protect myself, whilst also giving the other person compassion and space for whatever they are processing in their own journey. Because I know a lot of the times when things come up, it's not about me, it's about the other person and something that they're going through. And sometimes negative behaviour can be explained away, but sometimes inexcusable behaviour can't be excused. There needs to be actions to change it. And if there's only words instead of actions, I'm somebody that relies very heavily on that. If you say you're going to do something and then you don't follow through with it, I'm definitely going to chase you up and say, okay, so were you just placating me? Were you just letting me go to the next month and hoping that I wouldn't bring it back up? Because that's not how this works. But we're going to get more into all of these kind of things in this episode. So If you are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment about what you like in this episode. Maybe if I say some things and you resonate with it, tell me a little bit about your experience. If you don't want to leave it as a comment and publicly, you can email whatever you are feeling to me to cripplecroniclespod@gmail.com. Socials, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Cripple Chronicles Pod, and I am going to get into this week's episode of the podcast. In the last podcast episode, I spoke a little bit in the introduction about trying some new editing techniques, trying to think of a schedule for the podcast that works better than what I'm doing just now, so I can maybe post more regular content, clips, things like that. This podcast I am going to do a bit differently, and if you are an avid listener of the podcast, I would really like some feedback on what you think. I might actually put a poll up on Instagram maybe a week after this has been posted and kind of ask for your opinions. That'll be on the Cripple Chronicles Pod account. So if you see that popping up and you have any thoughts about this episode, please let me know, because it would just really help me to make this podcast better for those who are also watching it instead of just doing things that I'm enjoying. But yes, let's get into it. So the way that I have broke this episode down is into chunks, and some chunks are larger than others. I want to say I've broke it down into wee chunks, but for the notes that I've got for this, like, it is going to be a pretty lengthy episode. It is going to be an episode where I am pretty raw. So strap yourselves in. This is Honest Becca hour, I guess. Yeah, little slogan for myself there. But the first section that I am going to cover today, I have called the irony of healing. And I feel like this is going to be a lot of vulnerability in this episode. I always try to be as open as possible, and there are long pauses that I cut out of the episodes where I just kind of get distracted or sidetracked and I need to look at my notes and kind of recenter and refocus myself. But I'm hoping for this episode, like the one that I did about December and that being kind of raw, I'm hoping that this one can have kind of minimal editing and it can just be Becca being honest. I'm going to need to take a drink of water because my throat is really doing me bother today, and I'm going to cut the sound of me drinking out. I mean, if you want to hear that, then you're odd, you'll need to pay me for that or something. There's me making jokes because I'm feeling a wee bit awkward about being vulnerable. That is a defense mechanism, and it's something with being self-aware that I can point out and I can see it. So if there is parts of this where I'm making jokes, it is just to make myself feel a little bit more comfortable, because it is scary being this honest on the internet with strangers. Basically, I am also recording this a lot later in the day than I planned, so if there is some kind of general day-to-day life sounds going on that I've not been able to get in post-editing, apologies. But I suppose it's like a wet day outside, it's rainy car sounds. I guess that's maybe kind of calming to go along with the topic of this podcast. But like I said, it feels vulnerable because there is a lot of loneliness that comes with healing, and I want to try and break down what I mean about that throughout this episode, because I am someone who has got very comfortable with being on my own, enjoying my own company, but that's different from periods of feeling lonely. There were quite a few periods where I felt quite lonely in my healing, especially kind of the transition from being in hospital and having basically a different person come to see me every single day and bringing me, like, I had a big massive bin bag full of snacks from all the stuff, because if somebody comes to visit you in hospital, they will mostly bring a little something along with you. And if they don't really know what to bring you, then it's going to be a packet of crisps, a packet of sweets, a bar of chocolate. So I had all of that, and I went home and then went into lockdown. A lot of friends that I had were nurses. They were working on the front line, and there was one of my pals that I kept up with quite a lot in COVID. It was it was nice at the time to be able to hear what was going on, but it did make things a lot harder for me, because there was a lot of guilt that I felt where I should be out there. I'm stuck in my bed with this big massive frame on my leg, and I should be out there and I should be doing something. And I say that there's been periods of it, and there's times now where even I think, like, maybe I don't have as many friends as I would like to, because I've kind of fallen out with people, or I've drifted apart from people, or we don't really speak anymore. And there are points where I feel kind of lonely in that, but it's not as deep and as persistent as it used to be, because I have a foundation around me where I feel love and support. And if I ever feel really lonely, I know that I've got people to turn to. I know that I am not on my own during it. But going through it is about finding kind of friendly and supportive relationships where you both kind of lend a helping hand to each other, and finding kind of a good balance in that. It's all about kind of mutual give and take, and that's something that looks different on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes one person's more high energy, one person's more low energy. It just depends on what the context is of the relationship that we're talking about, and the things that you've spoken about, and the needs that each of you have that are baseline needs that need to be met. Because as we kind of support and encourage each other, it builds a sense of cooperation, but also interdependence. Like, being able to be independent but also have that relationship in your life, knowing that connection helps with knowing that connection is needed in the human life. Like, as humans, we are just innate to build connections and want to connect with people and have that kind of desire to have people in our lives. And it's not always for validation or like support. Sometimes you just enjoy spending time with somebody because you like their energy. Sometimes you meet somebody and you feel like you've met them before, and it's not because you're really getting anything out of that, but you just go off of your intuition of what you're feeling in that moment. And sometimes those relationships dwindle and burn out as quickly as they set alight, because you don't really know what each other's needs are. You don't really have those conversations. And I think that's the main way to maintain a relationship, is to talk about those things, to be able to identify your needs and build kind of a strong foundation where you're able to collaborate with people, but you're also able to do things on your own. You're not kind of building this codependency in the relationships that you have. Ideally, you want to have relationships in your life where you're able to work together with each other to both move on in each of your separate journeys, but being able to do it together. However, when people are at different stages of their journeys, it can sometimes have difficulties that arise, and some of them I think I've probably mentioned in that wee chunk where I was just babbling off script. Um, pardon me. Jeez, oh, I'm so burpy today. I think it's because I've had caffeine, and now I'm trying to even it out by drinking balance. Drinking balance. I'm trying to even it out by drinking water, and my body just doesn't want it to balance, to be honest. See, balance was in there. It just came out at the wrong time. Anyway, back to the points of what I was saying. I know that I said I went off script, but I don't actually have a script that I read. I just have points, and to be honest, the points for this are quite detailed because there's a lot of stuff that I want to be able to mention in today's episode. So I'm just going to get back to it instead of babbling on, to be honest. One of the difficulties that can arise is there can be times of imbalance where one person is more reliant on support, and it can end up feeling like one person is gaining energy whilst the other person has their energy levels drained. And being a former people pleaser, sometimes it can be really hard to have conversations where I feel like I might have been given more support than I've been receiving. And a lot of relationships, that's because I feel like that's my role. I am a very supportive person, but I can't always play the supportive and care role because it ends up with me having an empty cup when I'm pouring too much out to other people and I'm not getting enough back from those relationships in my life. That imbalance can then also lead on to people becoming too dependent on stability. Like I'd mentioned, like chaos attracting chaos, but stability also attracts chaos as well, because I know myself when I have felt like relationships have become codependent, I try to distance myself slightly because I want to be in someone else's world, but I don't want to be an essential component for it to keep turning. I don't want to have to be the catalyst for somebody else's growth. I want to know that they still have the desire to grow and to be better without me saying, oh, well, here's this and here's that. Because although I like to try and help people whilst they're healing, it ends up being not very helpful if it is codependent and I'm the one that's kind of calling the shots. And yes, they're doing the action, but it's me that's kind of putting the thought behind it sometimes. And I feel like that's maybe quite a blunt way to put it, because relationships are a lot more complex than that. But it's kind of just, if somebody is doing it just because I'm saying, are they really doing it for them, or are they doing it because they want to keep me as a person in their life? And that shouldn't be the reason why you change things about yourself. Like, yes, people are given ultimatums in relationships, which sometimes work, where if addiction is kind of involved, where it is something where it is highly self-destructive and you can no longer watch this person destroy themselves, there's an ultimatum there sometimes of stop drinking or I need to go. And sometimes that doesn't even work because addiction is, again, very complex, still like relationships. And I had already said that I'm wanting to kind of stick to what I'm saying. I'm getting really sidetracked because I didn't even want to start talking about addictions and relationships. I'm talking about growing in codependency and people being dependent on stability. And I think I was kind of started talking about addiction there because that's where it goes to for me, where when there is that instability of addiction and I'm kind of building this stability in my life, people kind of will latch onto that because they really want that in their life, but right now they're just not in a place to be able to give up alcohol and get to that stability. And it's quite sad to think about because I have had relationships like that in my life where I do hope now that alcohol isn't involved, but I'm never sure if that's going to be the case. But what I was saying is this kind of reliance and codependency, if I am continually saying to somebody about the same things, that triggers these negative self-talk loops that I kind of mentioned earlier. Um, am I the problem? Have I done something that has forced someone to make these decisions? Should I just stay so their growth can continue? But even though mine will stay the same, I won't move on because I'm using so much of my energy to try and help somebody else. And these negative self talk loops that I have in these scenarios, then it it's a trigger for me where I can struggle to be assertive. I feel like if someone crosses a boundary, I can understand why it happened, so should I just let it slide? How many times does that happen for it to be too harmful? And I have really worked on my communication so that when I have these feelings that I can put them into words where it's not accusatory. I mean, it's pretty blunt sometimes because I'm really trying to take my feelings out of it because I never want to hurt somebody else because I'm hurt. So I've really worked on my communication to try and bring these up, to try and have conversations when I do feel like my needs aren't being met or that I am being more helpful to somebody else. But then sometimes that can be met with defensiveness and where was I going to and sometimes that is met with defensiveness instead of understanding. And sometimes when that happens, I really feel like there's no way for me to be heard because if somebody is kind of in defense mode and I'm just saying how I'm feeling, it's going to get picked apart and my feelings aren't going to matter. And if I feel like my feelings don't matter, then I'm triggered into old ways of thinking because that's kind of how I felt when I was growing up. When times get tough, there is a change of dynamics in relationships, and that can be another difficulty because if a relationship has been working the way it's been going and then something changes where the dynamic changes, people notice that shift. Areas where more support maybe is needed because maybe it's a bit silent. And I felt like this in December, I had raised an issue to a really close friend that I had felt a lack of support for how close we were. And it ended up ending our friendship because of kind of defensiveness. And it really stung when having the conversations, like I couldn't regulate myself. My emotions were all over the place because I was just trying to tell her how I felt and she felt like I was telling her off, and it was just kind of voice notes between us and tones weren't matching up with like the text that I had sent and then how emotional I was in my voice notes because I really kind of cared about that relationship. But it's that for me, I say that my emotions were unregulated because going through those conversations, it was like I was sitting on top of a washing machine on a full spin cycle. Like I was vibrating and I couldn't really stop myself unless like I got one of my squishmallows and I was shaking it trying to like stim myself to try and get these emotions out in some kind of other way because when I was shaking it was mostly the bottom part of my body and that was then causing a lot of like pain in my muscles and things like that. We kind of both chose ourselves in that situation and that was where we left things, and I felt like I was experiencing a bit of burnout from being supportive and having such a rough time. And I really went into that conversation thinking that we would be able to talk about it and find some kind of compromise and some kind of way for our relationship to move forward. I have really tried to work on my communication of having expectations in a relationship because having expectations in a relationship is normal and often unavoidable because it is just kind of natural human interactions. I mentioned communication when having expectations because it is obviously really important to try and communicate clearly to whoever it is, friend, partner, family member, the needs that you have acknowledged in your relationship, and also ideas of how they can meet these needs. thinking about times where if you've been upset and your needs are unmet, how do you then go to the person and say, this is how I felt, this is what happened, and in future I think this would help. And then even if they try that in future and the thing that you suggested didn't quite work, you can still then go back to them and say, okay, I know we've had this scenario. Is it okay to check in with it? Because I know I said to do this, but that still felt a wee bit uncomfortable. So can we maybe try and change it a wee bit and do this next time? And it's just about kind of trying to work in that harmony, having those conversations where you can say, okay, this is a need that I have. This is how I feel like it's not being met. And this is how I think that we can do better. The main thing about having expectations in a relationship is making sure that they are realistic and reasonable in the context of whatever the relationship is, because having unrealistic expectations is only setting yourself up for disappointment, and your relationships are going to be damaged in the process. And that's not to say that everything is always going to go to plan. Expectations change over time. Like what I was saying, sometimes something you suggest doesn't actually work out in the way that you thought it would in practice instead of in principle. And that's okay to then go back and say, look, not quite feeling that. Can we change this up? It's a process of finding that balance and understanding and knowing that there are going to be times where it gets tough and each person is going to maybe need a bit more support in that, and identifying that and saying, look, I'm noticing that things aren't quite right. Is there anything that I can do to support you? But also not offering support that is out with your limitations. If you're already juggling 7 different plates, don't try and add another one on there, because then you're overstretching yourself to a point where meeting your friends' needs isn't actually going to be realistic in that. And if they're expecting you to do that because you've said you're going to do it, and then it falls through because you've got too many other things going on, that's somebody that's then let down. And it's being able to try and see the bigger picture in those things, in those scenarios. I feel like I am somebody who has a lot of love and a lot of care to give to other people, but I can't be codependent with someone. And I also know that I can no longer bleed myself dry for other people. Too much of my life, I have tried to be whoever people would like, because that's what I thought I needed to do to be accepted and to be loved. And I know that's not the case anymore. I really just want to be Becca, and it's taken a lot of time on my own, but also a lot of people who are also on their healing journey and also want to move at the same pace and in the same direction. I feel like this episode might end up being a wee two-parter, because although I said the points were big, I didn't kind of expect to be like nearly half an hour into recording and I'm only on the second point. So I'll see how long this is. If I end up clipping it into two, I'm going to add in an ending and a new intro, and this will be 2 episodes instead of one. And I know it's now at the half an hour mark before I'm telling you that, so now you're invested and you'll have to come back and watch the second part. And if you don't like that and you would rather that the episode was 2 hours long, then go complain in the comments. Fill my emails up about how much you hated that this was split into 2 parts. Let me know about it. But that's probably how I'm going to do it, because it's long, girl. Or boy, or non-gendered being, because I want to be exclusive. No, I want to be inclusive, not exclusive. Like, that was a wild comment, Becca. I actually did really well with these points to make sure that I had like good blending into each subject, but then I just get sidetracked there and started saying about something else. Oh, about cutting the episode in half, and I had to move because my leg has also got pins and needles. So I'm now going on to the second point, which is talking about finding connection with fellow healers, finding the group of friends that I have spoke about earlier on this podcast. I think it might have been episode 7, episode 9. I'm not really sure. It's literally called Simping About My Friends. I kind of go into a bit about how we met. It was through a group chat, and these were people who were healing, but there was some of these who ended up getting left behind in my journey. And it's not that I have any ill will about those people. And although I'm saying that I'm being vulnerable in this episode, I'm really not trying to be too specific about relationships that ended, because there is my side, their side in the middle, and I never want to feel like I'm talking shit about somebody or trashing a relationship, because I really try to view my relationships as there is still good parts in them and they are still good people. They're not just bad people because a relationship ended with them. And I just kind of want to put that out there before I go on to kind of speaking about the next things, because I'm kind of vague, but it's just because I'm not wanting to air all of my business on the internet. Although I do a podcast, I also respect other people's feelings where they might not want to be discussed or have the ins and outs discussed. But I want to try and think about how these relationships kind of impacted me and shaped the way that I think about things. Initially, there was about 20 people in this group chat, and it kind of whittled down until it was a smaller group. And I find that in quite a few of my friendships, the reasons why these friendships kind of die out is because people get kind of stuck on their healing journeys. They're used to the chaos, and when there's not any feelings of that chaos, they seek it out and they go and do self destructive behaviours, and then they come back and they say, okay, well, I've done this and I know it's not good for me, but then you see the next weekend they're doing the same thing. And that's really hard for me to watch somebody doing that, because there's obviously comfortability in chaos. If you have had a life where there has been trauma and it's been chaotic and that's all you've ever known, then yeah, when you start to heal and it starts to get peaceful, you do kind of start to miss it. There's moments where I'm definitely a bit manic and I do things that I wouldn't usually do because I just need a bit of that buzz. I need something, I need that hit of dopamine, whatever it is. Like, I need something, but I really try not to do things that are self destructive anymore, because I don't want to harm myself in the process. There is too much harm being done to me over my life that's not where I'm at anymore. And sometimes that chaos in other people's lives starts to leak over and impact where you're at. There gets a point where you think, if I'm saying these same things over and over again, can I just watch this person continually harm themselves and be saying the same thing? My opinion's not going to change, but right now their behaviour isn't really going to change either. And I've found a group of people in my life where I do feel like I am able to openly communicate with them about what is going on in my life, and I'm able to meet their needs and vice versa. And I'm not saying that's all the time, because, like I said, sometimes things don't go to plan. Sometimes people are upset by your actions because they feel like you're a big part, and they feel like they're a big part in your life and you've not prioritized them. And that's fair enough for them to feel that upset if you are very close to them in their life. I really feel like I am able to say in those scenarios where I don't feel supported, I'm able to bring it up. And like I said earlier on, kind of say, look, I feel like maybe my needs not being met in this way, and this is how. And trying to have those open conversations, because I want to maintain relationships in my life. I want to keep relationships, but it's very hard when you care about somebody and you see them doing things that are harmful to them, and it also causes you harm. And there has to be a point where you kind of think, is this for me anymore. I'm going to actually finish this episode off with the third point because the second point was a shorter one and this is a bit of a longer one. I'm at 40 minutes recording, and also in the next chunk of this, which is going to be at the start of the next episode, there is mentions of sexual abuse, and I would like to kind of be able to give a content warning for that kind of stuff earlier on in an episode rather than kind of just in the middle of it. So I'm going to finish on this point and keep in mind that the start of the next episode could be potentially triggering for you if you have experience of things like that. And I just want to make you aware. I will obviously put timestamps in the descriptions where this is so that you can skip over this point if you don't want to listen to it. But I'm going to get into the third point, which is accepting seasons of life. Then I'm going to round off this episode and we'll start the next episode by looking at kind of the next point, which talks about reflecting on past relationships. I like to think that relationships in my life are for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. There is a way to be able to focus on where I am in my current journey and the current season that I'm in, and what things are external out with my relationships that are then having an impact on my relationships. What do I then need to do? What level of support does the other person have the capacity to give at that point in time for the place where they're also at in their life? Because it's not just acknowledging where I'm at, but also where other people are at too. There are a lot of relationships in life that are really, really good for a period of time and they just burn out, kind of like the relationships that I mentioned in the beginning, the ones that start off and burn really brightly because it feels like this is a person that you've maybe known before, and they die out as quickly as they kind of set alight. And a lot of times where friendships or romantic relationships have ended in the past few years, I've been able to take a lot from them in the lessons that they have taught me in my life. Where in those circumstances, I was able to voice my needs because those people made me feel comfortable to do that at the time. Although, when in friendships or romantic relationships end, like it can be heartbreaking, there is still those good times though. And in the past, I would have definitely have been someone that would have scoured through my social media, my Instagram, deleted photos where we had together, went and found like tags and removed them and things like that because I just didn't want to see it. But I'm not really in that place anymore because I'm able to separate the good from the bad and also appreciate both of them. The good brought me the times where I was happy and felt accepted and there was contentment, and I can look back on those pictures now and I can feel those happy memories even if those people aren't in my life anymore. There are photos that I still have up around my house of people that I no longer speak to because that was a point in my time where I felt accepted and I felt loved. And I don't want to taint that because of what happened later down the line. The times were good when they were good, and the bad things don't take away from that. It's been it's being sad, but also being able to be okay with the fact that things end. And there's sadness and grief in that. It's okay to grieve relationships that meant a lot and you thought you would be friends with them for the rest of your life, or you thought that they were the one and you were going to get married and all of this. And that's a big adaptation. Like, I don't think there's enough people that talk about it being okay to grieve relationships, to know that they had a huge impact on you, but you also had to walk away, trying not to be hyper focused on what the other person's doing. Are they posting on their socials? Are they getting up to anything? Um, like for me, I want to be able to know that people are doing well, but I'm also not somebody that will tend to check up on people that I'm no longer friends with. I'm kind of somebody that will block them, and it's not because I'm being petty. I feel like that's a thing a lot where people are like, oh my god, they blocked me, they're being petty. It's not because of that, it's because I don't want to see what's going on in your life. Although I wish you the best and I really don't wish you any ill will, I, I don't want to see what's going on in your life because it's sad for me. There's that pain and that hurt knowing that I'm not a part of that anymore, and it is sad, and I need to protect myself from that. So if I block somebody, it's not because I'm being petty, it's just because I don't want things to crop up that are going to hurt my feelings. Like I said, accepting seasons of life isn't just accepting the season that I'm in life, but accepting the season that other people are going through in their lives, that there are going to be times where people are less available, and it's okay for me to still notice that there's been a change and bring that up and ask why it's happened. And sometimes people can get on the defense about that, but it's never because I'm passing judgment. I just notice that there's been a difference. I like to know where I stand in relationships, and if I feel like I'm uncertain or I don't know where I stand, that's where I start to feel like the rug's going to get pulled out from under me. There's something happening, and I just like an open line of communication. Like I've been saying, I've really tried to work on my communication. I would much rather talk about something and know what's going on than be blindsided and totally taken out of the blue when somebody brings something up that's happened months ago and I've not been able to do anything about it because I never knew that it was going on, and it's been kind of festering for that long. I really try to, when something crops up, kind of bring it to somebody, but also kind of knowing that sometimes people are going through their own things and that's okay. Being able to give others compassion about what they are struggling through, but being able to openly communicate about how each other feels in that. There are norms within society that tell us how friendships look, how romantic relationships look, how families should look, all of the things that you should be doing to have perfect relationships, but it doesn't quite work like that because every single person is unique. Whether you have two friends that are from the exact same place, they'll have different thoughts on things. There'll be things that you disagree about sometimes. There'll be experiences in their lives that bring up triggers and things like that. And you need to be understanding and show compassion for that because when people are healing, they need support. They don't need to be put down about something. And this kind of ties back into what I was saying about expectations because sometimes I'm classed as being high functioning and I'm not really, I've already said before in the podcast, I don't really like that classification because I'm not high functioning. Like it's more mania than anything. I kind of mentioned it before, doing things that I shouldn't really do, but I just can't help myself. I am not being productive to move things forward in my life. I'm being productive because I can't stop doing things because I feel like if I stop, then something bad's going to happen. And I know that's a trauma response when I am struggling, but it is hard for people to see the difference in me being productive and taking rest for myself and looking after myself in it, and also when I'm burning myself out to the extreme. And when I'm burning myself out to the extreme, I am meeting people's expectations that they have for me. But when the burnout hits, I can no longer keep up with those expectations because I've been burning myself out to try and meet them. And that's a level that I have been functioning at out of fear, because it's a cycle that runs in my brain of when things are starting to slow, I feel like, okay, well, I need to keep it up. I can't stop, I can't rest, I can't lie down, because everything feels too chaotic inside of my head, and I just need to do something to make it stop. But it's not really making it stop, it's avoiding it. And that is also a fear of letting people down, a fear of rejection, a fear that if I don't keep doing things, that someone in my life is going to be angry or disappointed in some kind of way. And these are things about myself that I'm really trying to acknowledge more at the time when it's happening, because it can be very difficult for me in those times to reach out and ask for help. I feel like I've got the blinders on sometimes, blinkers, whatever it's called, with horses when they can't see the side of them. I feel like it's called blinders, but maybe it's blinkers. But I can't see anything unless it's right in front of me. And the people in my life need to be aware of the warning signs to be able to support me fully. And when you're at a stage where you kind of dissociate away, or you have no idea what these warning signs are, it can be really tricky, and a lot of relationships blow up if it's not spoken about. And it's only been recently where I have started to genuinely think about a keeping well plan, a safety plan. What are my warning signs? Because although I've been under services since being a child, it's never really actually been properly acknowledged. I've never had a proper safety plan. So I started to create one for myself to be able to send to people in my life and say, this is signs of when I'm struggling, and here's kind of the things that you can maybe do to help me if I'm not able to help, like if I'm not able to reach out and actually ask for that help. I'm going to kind of end this off basically in a way where I think I ended off the first point, or the introduction, is I just want to be myself and show up authentically in my relationships, in the hopes that others do that too. I have found in relationships where I be my weird and wonderful self, that it lets other people also be comfortable to show those pieces of themselves that not a lot of people see, because it feels embarrassing or shameful, or you've been bullied for being a bit weird in that way, or it feels like that thought that's going to come out of your head feels stupid. But because I am just so myself and do things anyway, when people are around that, they then get comfortable to be themselves too. And I think there are some times where people get stuck in that kind of season where showing that authentic version of themselves will still bring shame and feel really heavy, and take a lot of work to kind of ease through that. But in that shame and guilt and heaviness leads to lying and embellishing about what your authentic self actually is. And when you are more comfortable to then show it, that creates problems in relationships, because you've not been honest about it because you were struggling. But it then impacts the relationship, because for me, honesty is one of my core foundations. All I want is honesty. And I can see that it can be hard for people, and guilt and shame and things like that are very heavy emotions. But to lie and deceive somebody to get deeper into their life, that is something for me where no matter a place that you're on at in your healing journey, I would rather you had said, I don't want to speak about something, than make a lie up about it that you then later need to retract, or gaslight me that you've said it, because I'm just not here for that. Like I said, I'm going to end this episode here, and the next episode is maybe going to be a shorter one. I'm not sure. We'll see how it goes. But it is going to be talking about reflecting on past relationships to start off with. And there is part of that where I talk about sexual abuse. So I just want you to be aware of that. I will obviously give clear warning when I am recording that, to let you know to stop listening, or what point you can skip to. But yes, that is it for today. I hope you have enjoyed this first part of chatting a bit about relationships. Please join me next week and I will have the next part of this episode for you. Take care of yourselves. Much love. Bye.